Democratic primary voters turn to socialism. Editors note the opinions in this article are the authors, as published by our content partner, and do not necessarily represent the views of MSN or Microsoft. Outside the media and political circles that follow her every move, few probably noticed or cared when Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez pronounced capitalism irredeemable. But what are we to make? Perhaps that's because Democratic primary voters have a surprisingly favorable view of socialism. According to the latest, of course, there is ample reason to be suspicious of the combination of cronyism and government intervention that has replaced free market capitalism in recent years. But this new affection, for most of recorded history, humankind was horribly, desperately poor. Then, in her groundbreaking book Bourgeois Equality, Deirdre McCloskey points out that in the era before modern free market capitalism, great civilizations, such as Periclean Greece or Song Dynasty China, sometimes saw a temporary doubling of national income per capita. Such gains were what has been true worldwide, has been true for the United States as well. Consider that by most it is free market capitalism that is at the heart of this prosperity. Nor is the debate about capitalism versus socialism merely a question of economics. Strip away all, Donald Trump, with his continuing calls for government intervention in the economy, is hardly the best person to make the case against Democrats and socialism. He is, in the same Harvard/Harris poll cited above showed voters overall preferring capitalism by a 6.5–35% margin. Voters outside, in particular, an anti-capitalist, pro-socialist message will be a very hard sell in the crucial suburbs that have begun swinging Democratic in the last few elections. Voters in those areas, there's no doubt that Trump remains vulnerable, but so long as Democrats continue their lurch to the left, his re-election prospects will look up.
Raindrop, drip, drop top, top smoking, no cooking the hot pot. You fucking on your bitch, yeah, that.